There's been an awful lot of time and energy, not just put in by the guys and girls that have organized BCXDisrupt, but by our speakers and presenters today and their commitment to our journey. So a round of applause for them, please. Now, I titled the sort of closing remarks here, "Why Are We Here?" And it's okay. I'm an economist. I'm not a philosopher. Okay. Although you know the problem with an economist. When you ask him for an opinion, you get at least 3 answers, right? So why are we here? Are we here so we could get a selfie with Will.i.am? Are we here for a decent cup of coffee and a free lunch? Are we here because the boss doesn't know where you are and he thinks you're doing some work? Or are we actually here to think about how we can start to make a difference, to start to think differently, and to start a movement of change in South Africa that can fundamentally make shit happen? That's why I think I'm here. Now, BCX, as we've talked about before, is South Africa's largest technology company. It's also, incidentally, the only wholly owned South African technology company of note. You will not find our name in the Paradise Papers. You will not find us listed on another foreign stock exchange. We are here and we are proudly South African. But with that ownership comes a duty of care and a responsibility to lead change in our sector with our businesses across the South African economy. There is a clear correlation between strong GDP growth and a strong, growing technology sector. It doesn't matter whether you look at developing economies or established economies, whether you look at Korea or the UK or America or China. So the duty of care that we feel then is how can we change the game when it comes to the growth of our sector, which we believe in turn will change the game in terms of the growth of GDP in South Africa. Why are we here? About 5 months ago, I picked up the reins at BCX. BCX has been born out of 2 different companies. An IT services company called Business Connection that had traditionally made its money from managed desktop and laptop services, running data centers, and installing ERP systems. And from Telkom Business, a company that had traditionally made its money from people who made telephone calls and people who want to connect themselves on data services. And the conversation that we very quickly began to have is probably exactly the same conversation that almost every business in this room is having right now. How are we going to be relevant for our customers in 3, 5, 8, 10 years' time? And internally, we've set ourselves a notional kind of time frame of what does relevance look like in 2025? What will we need to believe in for a large technology company to be successful in 2025? And I don't think it's going to be in selling laptops and desktops. I doubt many of us in 2025 will have a laptop and a desktop. Many of us will have a single device. It's probably going to be based on your phone. It'll converge the solutions and all your ecosystem in one place. Mike made the point earlier. You already accept a degradation of technology when you leave your home to go to the office, right? And yet my role in life is to provide that technology in your office. We've got to catch up and understand what that convergence looks like. Data centers. I've got 17 square kilometers of data center. 5 years ago, an asset of note. 5 years ago, a barrier to entry that few of my competitors could get close to. But right here, right now, where is the largest data center in the world being built? It's being built in the Arctic. Why? Well, for 3 very specific geo-economic reasons that South Africa is going to struggle with. It's being built there because the ambient temperature is 4 degrees. The ambient temperature here is 21 degrees. It's being built there because 3 sides of the data center are surrounded by water, and they're going to drive hydroelectric power into that data center at a price point. Whether South Africa stays on coal, goes to nuclear, or invests in solar, we'll still not get close to. And finally, it's creating a physical, secure environment, 3 sides surrounded by water. They built a great big wall in the front, Not many people live there. It's very cold. You get the plot. It's like Game of Thrones, right? It's the White Wall. Barring zombie fire-breathing dragons, you're going to be fairly safe there. So you've got physical security, you've got cheap power, and you've got a low ambient temperature. We can't here compete with that. The hyperscale and the access to the hyperscale and that data center that comes from cloud service providers like AWS, Google, and Microsoft is real, it's emerging, and it's going nowhere soon. So what's the relevance of my business in that world? There's a small company that you may have heard of called WhatsApp. Anybody heard of WhatsApp? WhatsApp is the largest carrier of voice calls in the world, but it absolutely owns no telco infrastructure. Okay? Just like Uber, the largest taxi company in the world doesn't own a taxi. Airbnb, the largest rental and accommodation business in the world, doesn't own any real estate. The largest purveyor of movies is Netflix, doesn't own a movie theater. We're entering into a platform-based world. So the relevance of a business like mine and a business like yours, when that disintermediation is real, but they're using your infrastructure broadly for free to create that, is a burning platform for us to understand and to solve. So what are we going to do? How do we generate change? And that's exactly why I believe that all of us here will have a different answer to that relevance question, but all of us here needs to address it full on and embrace the reality, make it our friend, and go and do something about it. So what we're going to do about it is probably not dissimilar from almost any business in any sector. Number one, what are you good at right now? What are you good at right now, here today, that generates cash? Make sure you hold that dear and you keep it close. In BCX, we call that our engine one. Our engine one today still generates cash for us. It services many, many customers in many, many parts of the country, doing many, many different things. It's really important. But I need to make sure that I can run engine one as efficiently and as effectively as I possibly can. And then I've got to take the cash that I'm generating from engine one and start really thinking about how do I start up engine two. And for engine two to be relevant in my context and in your context, engine two needs to be broadly adjacent to engine one. It's unlikely you're going to move into a completely different business. I mentioned Netflix earlier. Netflix was a very traditional retailer of videos and DVDs that you went to a store one day, had it overnight, returned it the next day. Its adjacency was streaming, video streaming. It created a different business from that. Where are my adjacencies and the natural places for a large technology company with a huge spread of customers to go? Now, we've heard, I think, today some very thoughtful and very insightful views and comments on where technology and the disrupted economy is taking us towards. So some of our bets are probably not that difficult to forecast. You've heard a lot about AI. We've heard a lot about data. We've heard a lot about analytics. There is the most enormous amount of data in this country. Data that at the moment we are doing very little with. It sits there in many different places. It sits with your bank. It sits with Home Affairs. It sits with your hospital. It sits right across the place. How do we begin to join the dots on that data and really change the customer offerings that you can receive? So we are working very aggressively at the moment with a number of retailers, FMCGs and others, using the new data science team that we created a few months ago to look at new solutions to old problems, but using the data that's already there. The opportunity here is absolutely massive. So we're focusing hard like many other people are. But what's my single biggest barrier to scaling that business? It's not the ideas that we've got. It's not access to data. How do I find the skills? My chief data scientist was saying to me the other day, it's really like being an investment banker in the early 90s. You can tell people what your salary is going to be. You are the rock star. And that's kind of cool, and I'm very proud of those people that are in that space right now. But you cannot continue to fish in a relatively scarce skills gene pool. You've got to increase the size of the pool, because unless we systemically increase access to those skills, We are not going to be able to scale data analytics and data science in a way that will make a meaningful difference to our economy. And that's why BCX is establishing its very own Data Science Academy in Cape Town. We opened the doors in January with 100 data scientists starting then on a one-year course. And we're also going to be running executive sessions there for 1 or 2 days where people like yourselves will be able to go and really start to get to grips with the basics of what this stuff can do and how we can access it. So skills there are our single biggest barrier. We've been thinking very carefully about adjacencies. We've been thinking, okay, so I've got some technology here. Well, how can I go and apply that technology? You've heard a lot of talk today about IoT and devices and connectivity. What we've begun to understand on the industrial Internet of Things play is that there's no spray and pray approach. There's no one-size-fits-all that's going to work. So use case by use case, we've begun to put solutions together for customers. We run several thousand kilometers of pipeline in this country, measuring and monitoring that, the petrochemicals that run through those pipelines day by day, all the time, using a whole blend of technologies. We work down in mines. We work on petrol forecourts. We're working with retailers. We understand that for the industrial Internet of Things opportunity to work, you've got to be very specific about the application. And one specific area where we've decided to really apply ourselves is the area of farming and agriculture. Now, I can see in the audience here a couple of friends and colleagues from AFGRI and Senwes and others. We firmly believe that right now, South Africa is relatively inefficient and ineffective by global standards in terms of crop production. There are lots of good and bad reasons for that. We don't get the subsidies that some of the Western world countries do. We have relatively small-scale farms across the piece. We have lots and lots of other social divisions and social issues in the farming community that we need to cross. But if you can start to really create a smart farm, where you have a soil sensor that tells you the warmth, the moistness of the soil. You have drones that can overfly the farm and tell you when to harvest, when to put the next input through, whether it's a fertilizer or more seed. You have sensors in the tractors, sensors in the seed drills, sensors in the silos that store the grain. The amount of incremental productivity that we can bring into farming in South Africa very, very fast is really, really significant. Now, why is farming so important? Partly it's important to me because I grew up on a very small farm in the middle of absolutely nowhere, where it was very, very wet, and the nearest neighbors were sheep. And farming is in my blood, and I care about it a lot. But more importantly, because if you start to change the cost of production of basic foodstuffs, you literally change the breadline. And in a country where we have significant poverty issues and issues around people's affordability to be able to get close to the right foodstuffs, that's a critical point. Secondly, as you change your global competitiveness, you start to be able to export more. As you export more, you guessed it, GDP grows. You create more jobs. So farming for us is critical. We've been talking to a number of people around this, and we're going to go very large into that space in the early part of next year. And we've been particularly working with GE. Sipe mentioned it this morning. Because we've also begun to understand there's a difference between invention and innovation. And we really struggle to access the big bucks required for R&D, the invention side of it. So a partnership approach where we can leverage intellectual property that's already been created through large R&D businesses, but bring them here locally and apply our innovation, scale, and pace. That's how we're really going to win and change the game. So our relationship with GE is a really good example where we see a huge long-term partnership for BCX and GE to really start to drive a different set of scale economies and opportunities. We've been looking at how then do we keep these businesses secure. The more IoT activity you have, the more devices you connect, and we're talking increasingly about edge computing and those kind of good things. How do we keep all of that secure? It exercises our mind significantly. We've talked a little bit about like driverless cars. It scares the hell out of me when the car in front of me has lost its signal, but mine hasn't. How's that going to work? Will.i.am was talking about the AI algorithms that may prioritize you and your life insurance policy over the guy in front, right? But the security of those systems is absolute. Maintaining the integrity of those solutions and systems is critical. So we're investing heavily in cybersecurity. And working with a partner called Deloitte that many of you have heard of, so the largest global player when it comes to cybersecurity, we'll be creating a new company next year, creating a new cyber intelligence center right here in Johannesburg, which is going to be by a significant way the largest cybersecurity center in Africa to really keep our customers secure and protected. It's a big play, it's an obvious play, it's a critical play, not just for us, but most importantly for all of my customers. We have got to keep you safe, we've got to be able to keep you secure in this new world. But even that's not enough, right? So there's some natural things we're doing. How do we organize the business? So I talked about engine one. So you've all got your own engine ones. They're going to be different to mine, but the concept will be there. You probably all, as you listen to this, think, I know, I've got my engine 2 bet, I've got this going on. How do you get the agility? How do you get the speed? How do you get the freshness of thought in relatively large organizations that continue to do things in pretty much the same way? So we've actually separated the bulk of those new bets, those new businesses, into a little place under a chief digital officer, a new role that we've created, with a completely new type of people that we're beginning to hire into that space, a completely new type of people. People that have been used to taking risks, people who have been used to running small businesses, and people who are not actually afraid to fail. And we thought long and hard about what's the right type of person to lead that kind of business. Long and hard. And you've met her this afternoon. Rappa Lang is going to join us as our Chief Digital Officer in BCX to fundamentally change the game. Thank you. Why? Because Rappa Lang is not from a large corporate background. She has a history of setting up, running, and looking at new businesses, understanding how new problems need new solutions and old problems need new solutions, right? It's about pace and it's about agility. And a number of people will be joining Rappa Lang in that space over the next few months to really focus on how we change the way in which we drive innovation in Engine 2. But I've already got 10,000 people, right? You've all got lots of employees at the moment. How do we engender this sense of urgency, the bravery, the courageousness that needs to come with it to really, really get every single one of the people in our organizations to think differently? Jack Welch said many, many years ago, and I remember seeing him about 1992, 1993. I'm old, right? 1992, 1993. And he stood up on stage and he said, for years and years and years, we hired the backs of people, the arms of people, and the legs of people without ever once realizing that the brains came free. Right? And we do. We put people in a box. We give them a job description. We give them what we call KPIs, which aren't key at all, but they're just things that we can have a performance conversation with them in 12 months' time, right? So we've really got to engage, all of us, really got to engage our workforces and our teams in a different way that allows them to bring that adventurousness, that courageousness, what Lars was talking about earlier, how it felt to be 3, right? I mean, how do we get that creativity back? Now, unfortunately, I don't run a Lego business. I can't bring the kids in quite the same way. But there's a couple of easy examples that we've begun to change. Number one, we've put this kind of chief digital officer and that Engine 2 stuff in place. Number two, we've just created something called the FIF. Now, I feel deeply grateful to my mate Richard earlier today for breaking the glass ceiling on the F, okay? So the Fuck It Fund in BCX is a small fund that we put to one side, okay? To say to everybody in the business, if you've got an idea, how can we help you play with that idea for a while to see whether it's a real idea that will change things, okay? And the first recipient of one of our Fuck It Fund awards was actually just this morning. He's come through with an idea around a virtual reality bot in a retail environment that's come out of some MBA research that he's currently doing, allied to some other things that we have access to with a couple of our partners. So we'll give them maybe just 100,000 rand, maybe just a couple of afternoons off a week to be able to go and play around with this stuff and see whether there's something real there or not. And it may not work, but let's fail fast and fail forward and then move on. If it succeeds, let's have the money and the energy and the time to scale it up quickly. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is the FIF. Okay. Thank you. But that's still not enough. That is still not enough. The single thing that keeps me awake at night, we were talking about it earlier, is pace, it's agility, and it is skills. How do we create a new skill set? How do we get access to different ways of thinking? And I think the absolute insight that came to me the other day is we've got to stop thinking about ourselves as BCX as being a technology company. If I started to think of BCX as an Uber, an Airbnb, a Netflix, platform-based businesses, remember I talked about platform-based businesses? What is the platform-based business that I should be? I think the platform-based business for BCX is to be a school. Just think about that for a moment. What do platforms do? They connect supply and demand, right? They connect content and people who want to receive that content. What can I create as a technology company? I can create a platform for education and schooling. We have those skills. It's about basic connectivity, some basic hosting capabilities. We have all the residual things within my organization right now to run BCX as a platform, which is a school. And we launched it a couple of weeks ago. We've called it BCXLearn.com. The initial offering here is fairly light and low-key. Every single one of the 25,500 schools in South Africa have free access to BCXLearn.com to be their hosting partner for their own website. That's the easy bit. In addition, we've made sure that the content that sits in the national curriculum can be hosted for free on BCXLearn.com for all schools to be able to access. And then we've said, you know what, we're a technology company. Now we need to augment that by putting proper content out there that's relevant to the technology agenda and the curriculum that we want to adjust to. So we've begun to put focused tutorials and extra content around engineering, maths, and science for free, for every student in this country to be able to access. Not just are we hosting it for free, but if you're a Telkom mobile customer, the data to get you there is also free. And just now, one or two of my competitors might be brave enough to zero-rate my website so that every student really can get to that website. But we'll see, hey. That's called a gauntlet, okay? We're not just doing BCXLearn.com. I see BCX as a platform, a school of the future. We've already talked about an amazing relationship we've developed with We Think Code. Miriam and I were talking earlier about how do we now take the I am the code concept and bring that to South Africa. I'm very hesitant to put some numbers around it at the moment, but my view is that BCX, with you in this room, should all of us be up for collectively, for at least being able to say we could bring 10,000 female coders into the I am the code work that we're doing and bring it into South Africa. Does that feel like a fair deal? You guys up for that? 10,000 next year or so? I'm going to be signing some forms at the back there where you can commit your organization to that, right? 10,000 is a lot, but it's enough to make a proper difference. So we really want to embrace that work. We're deepening our relationship with the We Think Code kids. How many We Think Coders are in the room? Put your hands up. Woo! So for this conference, we gave away 10% of the tickets, 10% of the tickets to students, people who are still learning, because we fundamentally want to make sure that everybody gets equal access to the ideas, the concepts, the diversity of thought that we brought into this room. It's absolutely important. I actually invited my 8-year-old and my 6-year-old yesterday to the press conference that we ran with a number of the speakers. And I was amazed by their ability later on in the day to not just regurgitate, but actually have thought about the data, thought about the insights, and start playing them back in a really structured conversation. And I actually think one of the mistakes that we've made in organizing this, and you make mistakes when you run these things for the first time, we need more children here, not just students. We really want to think about how would we bring in more children from schools here to hear this stuff. We shouldn't be underestimating them, exactly as Lars was saying earlier. Really give them access to what we're talking about. Surely that's the quickest way of preparing young people for the world of work, is to bring them here. So next year, and there will be a next year, don't worry. Next year, I'll make sure that we bring a lot of a younger generation here as well, and Richard will need to mind his language. Okay. So guys, it really just remains for me to say there's a lot of stuff we have got to do. There are a huge number of changes we have to make. A strong, growing technology sector is essential for the growth of our country. BCX is determined to be part of that, but your role as our partners and our customers is to really help us on that journey. Together, I fundamentally believe that we can create a better, a stronger, and a more powerful economy. We're prepared to invest in that. We fundamentally believe in that. The question is, are you prepared to help us future South Africa? Thank you.